So we're here. I'm Simon,
I'm Tamila.
and we are here with Harmonize. We're in the midst of our course on building conflict resilient organizations. Kind of how do you keep organizations able to be truly choiceful and remain functional in the presence of all the different dynamics that they encounter on their way from going from their mission to achieving their successful interventions. And part of one of the things our course participants requested is for us to talk about our own drama some more. So people really liked us talking about our own conflicts that have happened between us and how we dealt with those and what that shows about the frameworks that we used. So we're going to continue talking a little bit about that for their sake and just to talk to other people about our conflict tools and maybe you resonate with some of the dynamics that actually occur between the two of us. This next one we think will be fairly resonate withable, um,
And then
resonant, resonant, one might say, if they spoke English better than I do. But that's a dynamic that we encounter around the way that we delegate labor and share labor between each other, and the way that that shows up in terms of who is most visible in what moment with the public. So who does what and who looks to others as if they did what. And we do that as happening in the context of our different races, our different genders, our different classes, and all of that other thing. So, right, there's a lot of, and this is happening kind of in a wider political moment where people are paying a lot of attention to who is the person who's speaking, who's the person who's taking up space, who starts the thing, who appears as expert, and how does that arise from and contribute to different dynamics of oppression and marginalization. Would you add anything to like the intro framing of what this dynamic that we're about to talk about is?
basically, we're going to talk about how we share space and consider that with power, belonging, and justice, and how we navigate that given our identities, both personally and then how we're perceived.
Now, what do you think? Should we have a big, endless conversation that's really hard to track? Or should we move methodically through 8 different layers of human relationships to map kind of how this shows up on personal, interpersonal, organizational, systemic, ideological, world, all and source layers as a way of like getting deeper, but also tracking what's really going on? Messy thing or like obnoxiously structured Virgo thing?
I'd love the obnoxiously structured Virgo thing. If you
Okay,
got a tool for
cool.
that.
Cool. I actually also prefer an obnoxiously structured Virgo thing. So I'm glad we don't have to process our conflict around that.
Yes, exactly.
So again, right, when we look at a situation, any situation, whether it's a vision or vision that we're trying to create or a conflict, we look on those eight dimensions. What's happening personally, what's happening interpersonally, what's happening as an organization, what's happening as a system, the broader system, broader ideologies, what's happening in the world, what's happening in the realm of spirits and ancestors and all, and then what's happening kind of in connection to all life and the source of life itself. Wow, what's happening? There's a lot going on. So
Yeah.
you want to start on a personal level with this dynamic, and maybe we do like what
Where,
yeah
where
at the
were
beginning
we at the beginning?
where we
Yeah.
started
Yeah, let's start there.
back when we were wee ones.
Yes, when Simon and I were first beginning to work together many, many moons ago. What was that, 8 years ago? Um, so for me personally, in terms of our dynamic and how we share space and delegate labor and decide who's going to do what and what the visibility around that will look like. For me, on a personal level, I think I it was useful for me in the beginning because I didn't have any ego around you doing the thing. I mostly had insecurity around my own ability to do the thing, right? Which paired really nicely with my lack of ego because if there was ever something that like I didn't want to do, but I trusted you to do better, I was like, Sam, you should definitely just do that. Now that created a dynamic later that we had to address, but that's really primarily where I was in dealing with my own like imposter syndrome and my own insecurities around like, did I say the thing right? When do you just want me to keep going to the interpersonal layer? I can just do all the layers at once.
I don't know. What do you want to do? You want to go through, you go through them all or
I'll
go
just
back?
go all the way through. Yeah.
Okay.
Because interpersonally, I think what was happening for me, and we actually talked about this a couple of days ago, is that I can sense and tell when like you have a specific way that you want something delivered or a very like precise Virgo moment, like it needs to be said this way. And I'll be tracking that. And like part of the thing that I was doing was trying to do it the way that you would want it done. And so that would create moments when we were facilitating together where I would be like, I don't know if I want to speak right now. You can just do that. And so any of the spaces where I wasn't like 100% sure that like I had it nailed and would deliver it the way that like included all of your Virgo needs, I would just be like, no, I'll just defer. I also think interpersonally, something that was happening there for me, and I think this is just a theme always, is just trust and belief in your competence, which makes me much more at ease. I'm happy to sit in a session and just like let you do the whole
I
thing
know.
because I enjoy watching it. I learn from you. And so there's never any desire on my side to be like, I need to be the one to do this because I appreciate the way you do it. Organizationally on that level, oh, there's so much going on there because I feel like that's the part for me where I start thinking about externally how people are perceiving us and our dynamic, and trying to be attuned to that and making sure that like we're letting people know, hey, we understand the race and gender dynamic, it's cool. That's not like, because people can perceive it a certain way, like if you're doing more talking or if you interrupt me to add a point, right? And I'm very sensitive to that external perception. And you can actually, because now that I'm saying it out loud, and this is the thing with the layers, because they all like create the other ones and are created by the other ones. I'm like, is this really the organizational level? Because now I feel like I'm going into the interpersonal. Um,
I think there's ideological there too,
oh yeah, 100%.
right? Because it's like
100%.
because there's dominant ideologies that are happening that are
Mhm,
then framing how we are perceived and
mhm,
how we make that organizational call, and then how we're perceived by the ideologies could impact the organization. If everybody's like, oh, this is just a white dude talking,
yeah.
and these people aren't really about it, then
Mhm,
nobody's gonna actually want to come
mhm.
hang out with us.
To the point where, do you remember that one time that person said that called me a house slave?
That was real.
It was real. Because they came into the situation and felt like Simon was in charge and I was just helping. And like it tapped into that ideology for them. And that's how they perceived it and engaged with it. When like for me and Simon, that's absolutely not what's going on.
Honestly, I'm sitting here be like, can you? I'm taking on a lot. Why do we keep giving me the thing? You're like, because you got it. And I'm like, I understand, but like, can we share this one?
Actually, I think this is a good opportunity for you to go into your personal and interpersonal, and then we can do organizational and the other ones up together.
Yeah. So personally, for me, I think that there's definitely, especially earlier on in my kind of development, a lot of self-consciousness and neuroses around how much space I would take up as a white guy. And I had gotten like really, really rough feedback a few times in my life in ways that now reflecting back was like really not great feedback, really undercutting, really shame-based feedback, but I really internalized that. So I was in a process of trying to discern what is appropriate sharing of space and mutuality and peer relationships, and checking to see any internalized racism or superiority that might be disrupting that. What is that process versus what is like actually just making myself small and in a box and silent in the name of some kind of solidarity thing that isn't actually really respecting the other human being on the other side to negotiate with. So I was inside of that. There was a lot of like over checking, like, Tamila, can I talk? Tamila, do you want this? And Tamila would be like, dude, yeah, you wrote the paper, so can you do it? Can you just do it and supposed to make giving me 5 hours of work to do that thing? So I had to kind of like get that. So that's a personal layer. And then there's also a personal layer that I navigate, two other personal layers that are very relevant. One is like a real deep kind of, since I was a kid, need to feel seen. And sometimes that is kind of really a shadow operating of like, I want to be in the front of the room so I can be seen, so somebody can tell me that I'm smart and pretty and validate me. So if I'm not talking enough, then how am anybody going to ever tell me that I'm smart and pretty and validate me? So please give me the microphone. Right. So there's like that is happening
Mm-hmm.
for me, which will encourage me to overtalk. And then there's kind of a healthy version, which is like, I actually didn't feel fully expressed at younger ages. I made myself small and cabin. So I actually do want to just honor myself and express and be a part of community without playing pretend. So I'm like, I'm navigating that. And then I'm also navigating just on a personal level on this. You mentioned the Virgo thing. It's like sometimes there is definitely a way I feel clear about the way that I would say it, whatever it is. And I feel clear about the way that I would do it. And sometimes it's because I feel clear that the way that I have a line of sight on is the best way to do it. And I've considered other options, and that is the way I think it should be done. And sometimes it is just the way I would do it. And it's not the best. I don't even think it is the best. But then, and I'm inside of that. So if something happens that's different than the way that I would do it, I can often have that moment of like, oh, I want to do it differently. And I have to learn how to back that up and be like, do I actually need to say anything? Or is actually what's happening different and in some ways better and revealing other things that I wouldn't have revealed? And if I just sit there and release my sense of control and overfixation, I will actually sit there and shut up and learn something as opposed to over control. So I'm in that navigation. And like we talked about the other day, that I think that's the layer, the navigation that's still here on the interpersonal level. Because similarly, I have a tremendous amount of respect and trust in your competency to do something. And that's been built over time. And I have repeatedly experienced you doing something different from me in a way that then teaches me something. Right. So I know this for real. And this moment, I would do it differently. I would do it differently, right? I'm used to us being inside of a framework I created. Wow. Right. So when I'm doing that, sometimes I'll make a motion. And because you're sensitive and we're really keyed in, you'll watch me
Mm-hmm.
bite my tongue. And we had to clear up the fact that I'm biting my tongue because I'm realizing in the moment that my reaction is I'm actually catching myself before I try to overexert control or like operate on a shadow pattern. And I just haven't learned how to catch it before the micro movement. So I micro move and then I catch it. And that's impacting our interpersonal space and impacts the dynamic.
Because we're learning together. Like I'm learning when to discern between when you're trying to catch yourself and when there is something that you've discerned that you do need to add and that does
Yeah.
need into
And I
the.
think to fold in, let's talk about like the race gender of it for a sec. Cause like both of us just talked about, I think the way we talked about our personal interpersonal really reflects how we hold race and gender, which is like the first way that we just talked about this was you were talking about, you didn't explicitly say race gender. You were like imposter syndrome and speaking and egolessness. Like you talked about that. And then I talked about personal dynamics. But we both know that these things
Social.
are in some ways race, gendered, class, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of how we experience them, and in terms of if we don't check these dynamics, then it really becomes right. Even if the reason that I really want to be seen actually isn't best described as a patriarchy, white supremacy dynamic, it's best described as a family dynamic from childhood or an ancestral Jewish dynamic. I got to tell you about this deep healing thing I did yesterday where I like fed my ancestors fucking wild and they were like
Oh,
hungry for all of this stuff. So I had to like feed them in a certain way. And it's a whole thing. We'll get there on the all level. Foreshadowing. Okay. But like we know that it's happening. So if we didn't, so even though, yeah, I could describe my dynamics in terms of those white supremacy patriarchy, but we thought better actually they're described in these other terms. They're still obviously related to it in some way. And if we don't check them, it becomes a white guy who really needs to be seen operating based on his shadow with a black woman who is working with imposter syndrome and egolessness and cool helping it help letting the white dude kind of take that space. And what do you end up with? The manifestation of exactly the racialized nonsense. And then if we manifest that racialized nonsense, it reinforces the ideology to impose on everyone else, which is trash, right? And we know that it's trash, and that's why we're rigorous about talking about the personal interpersonal,
Mm.
but not necessarily being like, this is a white guy black woman thing, because in some ways it's also like, and when we really get it, it's like in some ways it's also like two people who always think they're the smartest people in the room in
Exactly.
the room together.
That's exactly
Like,
what.
and that's maybe maybe you think you're the smartest person in the room because you're a black woman, maybe you think I think it's I'm the smartest person because I'm a white guy. Who cares? We both think we're the smartest person in the room, and then we're like, how, like we're like trying to figure out how
Mhm.
do we check ourselves but honor ourselves but defer to the other and
Mhm.
do all of that, and then how do we like figure out together, it's like, okay, we can't just check ourselves against each other because like other people are brilliant, like what are we doing here? It's just like that's our little bubble of like what is going on that we have to navigate.
Mhm.
So now that's personal, interpersonal,
Mhm. And
interpersonal, and I think, yeah, you
the
know, do
organizational layer,
yeah.
because I think there's some really interesting nuance when we do think about it on that like race, gender, class level. But I think we enter it first from like, who are we? What are our needs personally, interpersonally, just like at a human level? And then the next layer is like, okay, how might this be perceived? What are the other dynamics that are happening that maybe we want to like attune to?
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think the organizational layer is like a lot about what's our overall, like balancing what's our overall business strategy and what skills do each of us need and what needs to happen in order to make that happen, right? The business strategy is such that some of the first things that we started focusing on developing a practice around were things that were my practice before we started working together, right? Co-governance structures and conflict engagement stuff. That was stuff I was doing while you were somewhere else developing HR skills and personnel skills and hiring and management skills, this whole other set of things. And then the way that we came together, we made a calculated decision to lean into some of the practice areas that I was doing because we thought it would build build our work faster, and serve the movement more from our particular angle, which then created this dynamic where like a lot of the things that we were doing were things that I had more experience than you were having, and then it's like, cool, how to what extent do we need to change that?
Mhm.
Because it's just a thing, right? To what extent do we need to change level of expertise, relative level of expertise around these things?
Mhm.
To what extent do we need to embrace it? If we embrace it, where is labor going to fall? And then if we change it, are we trying to change it to get to the same place at this skill set so we can share labor differently? Or are we trying to develop something where actually there's more space, there's just more of the business that's happening where the dynamic is naturally flipped, where you're naturally just it's inside your ministry already. So obviously I'm not there. And it's actually interesting. I think on an organizational level, one of the things that's happened is that there's a set of things that is so firmly within your ministry that I can barely contribute anything to it. So I'm not even in the room for the dynamic to be reversed because you're just doing it inside of your ministry, which is interesting. I never noticed that before.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that is definitely happening. And I think there are spaces where you also like run things on your own and I'm not in the room, but there's more overlap in that particular ministry where I'm like intentionally trying to skill up. And now that I think about it, I think that's an outgrowth of my own personal thing where it became clear because we had this conversation where I was like, I actually don't feel comfortable like doing a thing or riffing on it until like I understand it completely and I've got a full grasp on it. And like you came at it from a whole different angle and you're like, well, that's not my vibe. And I was like, what? And so my like internal need to like know it all before I can jump in definitely contributed to that um organizational dynamic and like why we made specific choices about you taking specific things inside of the organization and running with them.
Yeah. I want to, yeah. I want to go into that for, you want to go for it? Yeah, take it, take it.
No, you go into that further and then I'll go to the other thing.
Okay. Because I think I kind of keep want to continuously make this point, which is like, there was something there you said, which was like, that you wanted to totally understand a thing before contributing to it. And I was kind of like, that's not really my vibe. I was much more in a space of like, well, sometimes I'm transparently discovering in the process of having the conversation. And I'm more comfortable doing that publicly and being like, what about this? What about this? What about this? Let's go for it. I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go in a certain sense. And I think what's interesting is like there's a way we could collapse that into a race class gender dynamic very,
Yep.
very fast. Right? We could totally collapse it. This entitled white guy who can just say anything, and this black woman who's been hurt so much, so she won't say anything without being cool, which is like relevant, and we're tracking that. Like that's a function, but we're also holding it more broadly than that, which is like Tamila actually has an eye for detail and specificity and clarity and wants and that pushes everything farther and actually has a particular orientation toward learning. I think is like highly cognitive focus. It's like I want to see how it all fits together. I want to get the map. I want to establish, I want to know for myself that I have it. So I'm not just another ridiculous person out here saying nonsense. I want to get it so that I can get it and do it. And then once I get it and do it, I'm gonna crush it. Right. That's kind of like a approach to learning that probably is race and gender and classable in some other way. Right. And I'm having a different kind of experience in some respects, which is like I'm trying to tap into a space of intuition and collective consciousness in a certain way and then discover what is there through the process of speaking and creating. I'm like, I don't really know what's going on, but I'm just going to kind of follow it and let it emerge. And obviously, cool, we could race, class, gender that too. But it's like on that deeper layer, oh, this is very interesting. There's a lot of creative possibilities inside of that that are all deeply, deeply honoring of who we really are and how we experience ourselves from the inside that we then get to work on. And it's like, cool, we know how we're experiencing each other from the inside, where our dynamics are. Let's do that. Cool. Is it a pro? Do you need to tell me that I'm being a white dude? Like, do you need to tell me or do you not? Because you might, but you might not. Right. And then,
Mm-hmm.
and that it makes it such that when there's a moment that's like, yo, you got to check the whiteness of that. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I have to check the whiteness of that. Right. I feel seen. I feel hurt. I feel like we are on it on a human level. So when we make the point matters.
Mhm. Exactly. This is bringing up so many things for me because it's so critical in terms of like conflict resilience because if we didn't like spend the time getting to know each other, building relationship, understanding the ways that we come to the work and why, it would be easy for me to get into a space where I'm like, oh, well, Simon just likes to talk a whole lot because he's a white guy. And then I get collapsed in that, and there's no way to really shift it. And now, in the path forward is I've got to talk to Simon about his whiteness and managing that, and which is much bigger and can lead you into conflict if people don't have a lot of resilience and shared analysis around race and things like that. But because I saw it as also just like a manifestation of the things that you were talking about earlier in terms of like the personal and interpersonal, then it's easier, much easier for us to talk about that from a vulnerable and human space, as opposed to anchoring in something that like can't really be shifted, right? Like I'm always going to be Black and I'm always going to experience any anti-Blackness in the world that's directed at me, right? And so if I get locked down into a space of like, well, I always have to spend this time being like 100% prepared and learning everything before I'm comfortable in front of an audience because I'm going to be perceived by anti-Blackness. That's a particular headspace and a particular choice versus what you just articulated, right? When it's like, no, this is my approach to learning, right? This is a cognitive thing. This is something that I take everywhere with me. And it might be informed by these experiences, but it's a beautiful part of like the way that I engage in education.
Yeah. I think we're talking right now, we're also talking about the ideological level. We're displaying our ideology right now, which is a particular way of thinking about the intersection between race and personal identity and how those things are layered. And sharing, like, if we were to be inside of an ideology that was only race and gender are the only things that matter, our set of choices would be much narrower. Right? Because what would happen is Tamila, if we are inside of that, Tamila would be here and say, Simon, you're talking too much because you're a white dude. I would do one of two things. I would either be like, oh my gosh, you're right, I'm a terrible white dude, and now I'm gonna collapse, and now we're not gonna get any of my gifts because I'm just being in the corner thinking that I'm a white guy and my only role in movement should be to do the dishes. It's like, cool, yeah, do dishes, but like also like be a full person like everyone. um but I'd either do that, or I would react even more because I'd be like, I feel unseen in what is happening for me. What's true for me is that I'm kind of trying to be inside of this intuitive experience, which in some ways comes from comes from a desire to tap more into my embodied knowledge and intuition, which in some ways arises out of a patriarchy analysis. We're trying to do that. So now you don't see me. So now we're all this stuff, but instead we're in an ideology that prioritizes like being able to balance all of these things. And that's what then allows us on the organizational level. Now we have to make these decisions about who's going to do what and how are things going to be shared, not just so each individual can get what they want and our relationship can stay good, but also organizationally, how are we growing and how are we pushing ourselves and how are we our gifts contributing to the other one's gifts. So I can be like, Tamila, yeah, you do that learning style thing, and like, you know what one of your edges might be, try some of the things I do, like try to lean into it, see what happens. Yeah, maybe there's race stuff there, but like we'll get there if we get there, but try that. And if the race stuff comes up, it will have it inside of this context of uh, expanding learning into your own intuition. And you can reflect the same thing back, which is like, yo, you're not attending to details in this particular way. You're not communicating, or often what you say is like, you're not communicating in a way that people understand well because you're so in that intuitive space for yourself. You actually haven't thought it through all the way to be able to explain something. You're just saying things that make sense to you. And I'm like, oh, thanks. I know how to work on that without feeling shitty about being a white guy. And then you might be like, and you get away with that a lot because you're a white guy. And I'll go, oh, fuck. If I get away with that a lot because I'm a white guy, I really need to care. But I'm not going to make the shift by thinking that I'm white. I'm going to make the shift because I recognize the whiteness is a motivating factor for the shift. But I'm not going to shame myself into making a shift about how I relate to intuition. I'm just going to do it differently because I understand the impact.
Exactly.
Ooh, systems layer?
Yeah. So, wow, okay. Systems layer and the way that we share space. While I think there's something there about capitalism,
Oh, really?
compensation, I think there's something there really around like the misogyny that's embedded in our capitalist systems. Like I think it's a I don't know, and I told you this before, like the fact that we are just business partners together and what that means and what that creates, I think is impacted by those types of things. What else comes up for you around the system?
What would you say more about that last thing that you said? You
Oh,
go, go.
about
Yeah, yeah.
how the systems impact. So build, we're trying to scale up, right? And we want to be able to find other folks to invest in the work we do and join the work that we do. And I think our identities and how we divide labor, especially in front of those people, impacts like their willingness and their perception of us, right? And I think that's a thing that we attune to often, where it's like, okay, in this room, the black lady is gonna have to be in the front. Like I'm gonna have to do that because um identity is important in this space. Like we're talking to a room of like black mothers who are like, building infrastructure for that community, right? Like maybe I am the person who needs to engage in that. But we've also had conversations where it's like, maybe not, especially when our ministries are like maybe your ministry is better suited for a particular organization that we're working with, even though the demographics of that organization like look like me, right? And so we might think on the face, maybe I need to be in there, but also if it's your ministry and you're the best suited to deliver the information and engage in that space with them around that particular topic, then we need to be able to allow you to do that and have the vocabulary and the shared language to be able to enroll people in that and address any sort of perception blips
Yeah.
or issues that might come up that we receive from the system.
Yeah. Then there's that weird layer, which is like, if the room that we've had, where the room is inside of an ideology, the other people in the room are inside of an ideology where who talks matters in a way that is different than us.
Mm.
And it actually, so then we're like, in order to build trust and credibility with these people, Tamila has to be the one who does something. But functionally, what's happening is actually it's enforcing more labor and more discomfort on you to meet an expectation. So this notion of like, well, the black people should be leading actually puts you leading in a very particular way of what that means in a very particular construct, then actually puts labor on you and pressure on you in a way that's very strange.
Which I
So we're
resent,
what?
which
Yeah,
I
which is
resent.
weird.
I like,
Yeah, yeah. We've actually had we've been in live facilitations where someone has put in the chat, like privately or publicly, why is the black lady not talking enough? And it's like, because we made a decision, and what are you doing?
yes.
It's real. And I think also on a systemic level, yeah, yeah, you said it, like we're trying to scale, like we're trying to figure out how we build a business model
Mhm.
around this. So, and we're trying to figure out how we impact systems. So the way that people embedded inside of those systems perceive us
Mhm.
is really, really important in terms of that. So we're making those decisions. And sometimes we're making the decision to say they expect this to come from a white guy, let's make it come from a white guy. They expect it to come from a black one, let's come from a black lady. And sometimes it's like they expect it to come from the white guy, so let's make sure it comes from the black lady, or
Mm.
vice versa. And we just try to describe it. And that way is actually part of our attempt to try to get into that systems layer and get into that ideological layer and say, we're actually not going to play your game. We're going to push an intervention
Okay.
up in that way.
And when we experience things where the external perception is trying to force us into playing the game, and I know in the moments when there are impacts on me, when people have like specific expectations about what I'm supposed to do because I'm the black woman in the room, or when I am experiencing like racialized treatment that's creating like an emotional like or triggered reaction inside of me. Another way that we like divide labor is that like when I express that need and when we see that happening, you're often the one to like take that first pass at a response and taking on that emotional labor of addressing it, which I really appreciate.
And yeah, and there's also, I think another systems layer is like, if you look at our positions inside of capitalism generally, then if we both show up to a meeting and I'm able to say to you, we both need to be in this meeting, but I'll do most of the prep and I'll hold down the vast majority of it. We just really need you to make sure I don't say anything out, out of pocket, or like clean things up, translate, you can track what's happening and then add things that are necessary and provide complementary things. But I got 80% of the labor for this hour, but we bill the hour the same, right? There's actually like a justice moment happening right there. In our last couple minutes, I think we talked about the systems, we talked about the ideology on the all level. I alluded to, I think, one of the things that's happening for me, which I like really only felt and truly discovered maybe like a week ago or so, a little more than a week ago, which was this like a feeling inside of me of this kind of deep ancestral wound of invisible, like being invisibilized and being hungry and being on the outside and being perceived as not legitimate, being perceived as not a threat, having my like people's connection to spirit be like delegitimized and murdered over the course of thousands of years. So it felt like there was this like ancestral ghost that's hungry inside me that kept kind of coming and be like, do I belong? Does anyone see me? I'm going to die if people don't think I'm connected, but I'm pretty sure I'm connected to the spirit. Right. So that's happening inside me the whole time. So in some ways, I think that process, right, I'm trying to be healthy with that process and be like, cool, I want to actually deeply honor my ancestors' wisdom and become a vessel for that so it can healthily be in the world. So that's something that's really happening. And I have to work with the shadow of that, which is like, I don't want that ghost ancestor constantly grabbing at the world and manipulating the world to make up for wounds that happened over the course of thousands of years ago. So I'm like trying to navigate that thing, and that's influencing how I'm moving. And then I think there's also an ancestral thing, which is like, I'm Jewish, and my justice practice, I consider my Judaism practice. Like I am very invested in characterizing what I'm doing as an expression of this wisdom path. And to not say it, or to be so quiet that that's not clear, that like we do conflict, and one of the key ideas of conflict is teshuva, a Jewish idea. It's like there's an ancestral thing actually that also plays around, that if I get too small, I do disservice to that part of the project.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Oh, wow. Now you've got me thinking about my ancestral connections and like how I really do like my core anchor is justice. My therapist literally just said this to my face like a couple days ago. Um and and like it's that sort of energy. And when I think about my ancestors are implicated in that justice, right? And so all of the work that I do, the reason that I'm at Harmonize, the reason that I feel like in like intervening on the organizational level and helping people work together is like my purpose is because it's tied to justice, and it feels like and so inside then of our organization and the way that we divide labor, because I have such like a passion and a desire to like make change. Like there's also like a I want to hold this, but like what is important for me to let go? What is important for me to let you hold? Because that's better for the organization and what we're trying to do versus what's just better for like me energetically and what like little baby Tamila ego wants.
Yeah, and I think also, if I can, like on your all level, like it's like the the project of legitimizing Black knowledge and Black female knowledge and Black female expertise and Black female wisdom, that's an ancestral project. Like if you were to just not, even if for yourself on a personal level, be like, ah, it's cool, Simon, do it. If you didn't lean enough into that layer
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
would not
And
be tended to.
there's such a because there's a push and pull on that layer of like where I'm not being pulled into over demonstrating because other people have that demand or because other people um have that sort of deficit view of me, but I am operating in bringing legitimacy to like that Black female knowledge in a way that like feels good for me and agentic for me and what I think is needed, and I'm not just like tap dancing and performing in response to other
Yeah.
people's perceptions.
Well, We figured it out. But as a close, as a close, I think just to like talk about the model like that we use, right? We took this one in this moment, right? We took this one very tiny seed of how do you feel about the way we share labor and delegate labor and our optics. And then at the beginning, right, when we first started doing this, it was tense going on. But by understanding what was happening at all of these layers for ourselves, we can think, okay, what do we really need to do? Tamila, what do you need to do to make that personal thing work?
Mhm.
Is there anything we need to do interpersonally so we develop more trust? Organizationally, what do we need to pivot and what matters? Systemically, when are we going to try to intervene? Ideologically, do we have a way of working with this together that works? What is the dominant ideology? When do we want to push against it in different ways? On all like on all of, oh, we forgot the world layer. Oops. We have another meeting to get to.
Yeah.
So Tamil actually has labor to do without me. So we have to end. but but I think that the point is that on the where we took it through those different layers, you can see how those layers help us expand out and blossom out all of these different things. And then through engaging that conflict, having this conversation, we didn't just figure out what to do about who talks. We also develop trust and more resilience and a better shared analysis of all of these different things. And that's kind of one of the roles of taking things through that map as a way of processing to build conflict resilience.
All right. Well, that's it for today. Come back for more dirty laundry next
Have
time.
a meeting next time on Tamila and Simon's drama. All right.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.